Perfect, perfect. Well, without further ado, then I guess we're at the top of the hour. I'll jump into my topic. Today, I'm talking about sharing Power BI with reports with the world. 5 things to know. Specifically, I'm talking about the Power BI publish to web feature, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about it, and it's not necessarily understood so well. So that's why I put this together to hopefully to clear some of that up. We'll be talking about sharing in general a little bit, but that's the nut of it. So hopefully it's what you're looking for. Just to get started, first slide here, we want to make an announcement if nobody's seen yet. The fact that the SharePoint conference has been renamed to the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, and it will be held next year, March 23rd to the 25th, 2021, at the same place, MGM Grand Resort in Vegas. So we'll be looking forward to that. Hopefully it'll happen. I'm pretty sure it will. Also want to say thanks to all of the sponsors. Without the sponsors, this sort of an event can't happen. There are costs associated, and of course, the sponsors help out with that. And my company, as I'm proud to say, is one of them, Tygraph, down there at the bottom. Also, there's a raffle to be held. I don't know exactly when it's going to be held, but you need to visit vendor booths and watch videos and answer questions around that. So if you want to win one of 3 Oculus Quest, which is a very cool device. I have one, by the way. I just recently got one, and it's helping me get into some kind of shape. Previously, I'd claimed that round is a shape, which is true, but this is actually a little sleeker. That's the idea. Amazingly, it's good at that. And finally, before I get into it, wanted to urge you to donate if you can to one of these fine charities. There's a lot of folks out there helping in this crisis, so we'd love to show them some love. And this conference is very generously donating 10% of their sponsor proceeds to the United Way. All right. So with that out of the way, first of all, I'll introduce myself. If you don't know me, my name is John White. I am the CTO and co-founder of Tygraph, also known as Unlimited Viz. The company's name is actually Unlimited Viz, but we are the makers of software called Tygraph. We're kind of known that way. I have been an Office apps and services, well, a SharePoint MVP for a very long time, and recently I've also been awarded a data platform MVP for my work with Power BI. So I kind of straddle both of those worlds, the Office world and the data world, or the Power BI world. Those are my particulars up there on the screen. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. Take that down if you can. And yeah, ask any questions after the fact. I'm quite happy to answer them. And to answer one question that might come up, yes, that's me in the picture there doing what I like to do when I'm not doing this with a couple of my friends, the bull sharks. You'll see some more of my photography as we go through. I like to punctuate my slides with just pictures that can't be copyrighted because they're mine. So I'm an avid underwater photographer. That also explains my rather weird Twitter handle. In addition, if you're interested in Power BI news, etc., I'd urge you to follow my podcast, Bifocal, which I do weekly with my friend Jason Himmelstein, pictured there with me. I'm on the right, by the way. We're available at all the, I'll find podcast aggregators everywhere. We actually just recorded a new one a couple of hours ago with Will Thompson, who's the group program manager for essentially Power BI Desktop. So our agenda for today, and before I read through the agenda, I want to call your attention to the bottom of the screen. There is a link and a QR code. They're the same thing. If you want to go to that link or take a shot of that QR code, you'll be taken to a Microsoft form. If you want to fill that out, you will have a copy of this presentation emailed to you pretty much immediately. There is a question on there. Would you like more information about Tygraph? Tygraph is an analytical software for Office 365. So if you're interested on reporting your usage of Office 365 or Microsoft 365, I should say, perhaps you're interested in that, check yes, but that's the only other thing that could possibly happen with the email address that you offer. We're just sending the slides. All right, so today I am going to talk a little bit about sharing generally in Power BI, what that's all about. And then we're going to talk about the publish to web feature. First off, 5 things, remember from the title. First off, we're going to talk about how to turn it on in your tenant, how to basically enabling your tenant, or how to turn it off in some cases. Number 3. Oh, okay. I've blended some stuff together, and I don't know why I'm missing a slide. So I'm going to point out the fact that one of them is using the feature. It just didn't make it into my agenda slide, and I'm not sure. I'm also going to point out to the fact that publish to web is not secure, and I want to underscore that point a couple of different ways. And then I want to talk about how publish to web differs with the sharing experience elsewhere in Power BI and some of the things you're going to want to watch out for if you use that. And then we're going to talk about data latency, which is the time between which the data changes at the source and which you can see it in the reports. And then we'll just wrap things up. Hopefully that sounds okay for everybody today. All right, so let's start by talking about sharing in Power BI. In Power BI, sharing revolves very, very heavily around licensing. So to start with, we're going to talk about licensing in shared capacities. You may have heard of premium or dedicated capacity in Power BI. Premium and dedicated capacity are kind of the same thing. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But what I'm talking about here is shared licensing. And Power BI it's interesting. You can do everything in the Power BI service, and you can certainly do everything in Power BI Desktop because Power BI Desktop is a design tool for the Power BI service. You can do you can basically access all of the Power BI features in the service that don't have to do with sharing with other users. If you want to share with other users, you're going to need a license of some sort. I like to liken it to dating. You can do whatever you want by yourself for free, but as soon as you want to involve someone else, it's going to cost you. I don't know if anybody's laughing. This goes over fairly well in rooms normally, and this is a very like talking into, well, I'm talking into a microphone. So anyway, so you can see a lot of the features at the top are available both in free and pro, but if you look at some of the features in the bottom, these all have to do with sharing, with other users accessing content one way or another. So sharing requires a license generally in Power BI. That's really the important thing to note. Now, I've been talking about shared licensing, and that's another word for that is pro licensing. So you'd have a Power BI license. You'd be paying that extra $10 a month per user, or you'd have an E5, which includes that license, and each user is licensed. So when you share a report in Power BI, not only do you have to have a license to publish it, but the people seeing that report also have to have a license. And when you're publishing a report in Power BI, you're publishing to typically a workspace. The personal workspace is what you're going to use just by yourself, but you're going to use team-based workspaces if you're going to be sharing things within your organization. And when you're using shared capacities, your actual data sets are being put on capacities in behind the scenes. These are managed completely by Microsoft. And you don't necessarily know what capacities they're going into. And you may be sharing that capacity with data sources from another tenant. They're all moved around and load balanced for you, but you never really quite know where that's going to be. So this is the shared model. Now, a few years ago, the Power BI folks introduced a new type of licensing model called dedicated capacity. And with dedicated capacity, it's a bit different. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Dedicated capacity is purchased for the tenant. You are essentially buying CPUs, memory, and disk for just your use. So these capacities along the left hand or on the right hand side of this slide now become one of those blocks will just be for my resource usage. And then I can assign my workspace to that dedicated capacity. And when I do that, I know, let's say I buy a dedicated capacity, I assign a workspace to it. I know that the only data in that capacity is my data. When you do that, because you've got your own CPU and memory and disk space, Microsoft really doesn't care what you do with it and who you share it with. And therefore, if you have published a report into a workspace that's attached to a dedicated capacity, any other user can view it. They do not need to be licensed. So that's an alternate licensing model for Power BI if you want to share widely. But the onus is on you to manage that workspace. And then you see some of the other features on this slide that allow things like up to 48 refreshes per day. The shared capacity gives you 8. But the big one here for our purposes today is unlimited sharing. Premium looks like this. You don't have to put all of your workspaces in your dedicated capacity, and I frankly strongly recommend that you do not do that. You could continue to have workspaces in shared capacity, but you assign workspaces to your dedicated capacity, and you don't want to overdo that, or you're going to eat up all of your capacity fairly quickly. All right. So that's talking a little bit about licensing in Power BI. Sharing now, because sharing requires a license, folks have gotten somewhat creative about getting around that. Now we've got one way of sharing Power BI reports is simply by handing around a PBIX file. So I got to explain what that is. A PBIX file is the file that is created by Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is the design tool for the Power BI service. So I import my data into it, I do my modeling, and I do my reporting. I build up my visuals. And typically I would then publish to the service. But I could just leave it in the PBIX file and hand that file to someone else. They may or may not be able to refresh it if they have the rights to do so. But it's a kind of a clumsy, awkward way to do it, and it doesn't cost any money. The desktop was not designed. It was not designed to be an end user tool. So basically, inside the PBIX file is going to be the report, and it's only a report. Obviously, you're not going to have access to the Power BI dashboards service. That's not done within Power BI Desktop. It does contain a cache of that data. That's how Power BI fundamentally works. And if you want to get your data refreshed from the source, the user you hand it to is also going to have credentials to that backend system, and they'll of course have to have Power BI Desktop installed on the system. It's not recommended. I just include it here for completeness. In the Power BI service, you can also share a report or a dashboard directly to a specific user. Typically, this would be a report that was in your workspace, your personal workspace. That user will be able to then access the reports and the dashboards in your workspace. They will have to have a license to be able to access that. Again, any sharing in Power BI requires a license. And it's just all you can share it with is specific users. It's very, very simple. You name the users and then they can have access to it. You're given a URL that you can hand them. And you can see the dialog box for this here at the bottom of the screen. It gives you a report link that you can try to access. Much more elegant way to share content in Power BI is through the use of workspaces. A workspace, again, if you go in with just yourself, you'll get a personal workspace. The personal workspace consists of dashboards, consists of data sets, and it consists of dashboards. I'm forgetting the third item. I should be able to see it very easily. It's dashboards. Sorry, dashboards, reports, and data sets. Duh. And it's really just a collection of these things. And the workspace is basically a common area. It's the same thing as a personal, but the workspace inherently has a membership of multiple people. So I can assign access to the workspace from multiple people within the organization, and then they all can come here and see the reports. You're not handing things around, and you're not sharing things from your personal workspace. It makes awful lot more sense, and the security here is much more granular. In fact, you can assign things. You can assign permissions to another Office 365 group. You can also use a workspace as a building block for a Power BI application. So now that you've got your workspace, you've got your dashboards, your reports, and your data sets exactly the way you want them, you could then publish that into an application. And that allows distribution to a wider set of users who you might not want accessing the workspace directly. That's what these Power BI apps are all about. When you publish a Power BI app, you're publishing out the reports, you're publishing out the dashboards, You're also publishing out possibly some custom user interface, but you're not publishing out the data. The report and the dashboards are still connecting back to the data that's in that workspace. So when you've set up a refresh schedule, that's the refresh schedule that's being used. But what you can do at that point is go back and make changes to the report in the workspace, and you don't have to deploy them out to the app necessarily immediately. And when you go and access a vendor's app, and which is what you see here, this is an app from Microsoft, the usage analytics app. When you go to get an application from a vendor, that's how it gets delivered. It gets delivered as an app, and of course, it creates an underlying workspace as well. So several levels of this sort of mechanism of sharing. And again, all of these have require licensing. This is all sharing from the Power BI experience itself, from the Power BI UI itself. But if you want to take the Power BI reports and put them where users are, you can use Embed in SharePoint or Secure Embed. And this is for reports only. So if I want to embed a SharePoint report, or sorry, embed a Power BI report in a SharePoint page, full fidelity, I can use this approach and use the Power BI web part. Or I could actually embed it in any web page internal to my organization, because I am still going to have access to it, and I still am going to have to be authenticated. So it essentially is iframe style code. So it's still client side. The user has to have access to the report to be able to see it. These approaches are completely appropriate to use with sensitive data, because it's really just as if the user is going to the Power BI interface themselves, except we've abstracted that away and we're putting it in context in a SharePoint page. And of course, it requires a Power BI license. Again, either the user has to be licensed or the report has to be in dedicated capacity. All this stuff, except for handing a PBIX to people, require a license. Here's something that doesn't. Don't get too excited about that, and I'll show you why you shouldn't get too excited about it. Publish to web. The publish to web feature was introduced into Power BI very early on as a mechanism to share these reports with the world, and that, of course, is the title of this talk: how to share your reports with the world. It does not require a license. It doesn't require dedicated capacity of any kind. You can do this even with your with a free account. You don't even have to be a pro user to be able to do this. You can only do this for reports. You can only publish reports to the web. You can't publish dashboards. Users do not have to have been granted access. And it's very, very easy to share your reports this way. We'll see how to do it. In fact, the Power BI team has a gallery, and that's what's pictured on this slide, of various reports that are published to their data stories gallery. It's what this is called. And you can go in here and you can click on any of these links and open up any of these reports and see what's going on. Obviously, with what's been going on with COVID lately, there's an awful lot of COVID data. They have actually a special section for that. Myself and Jason actually put together a little tutorial on how to use the Johns Hopkins data and to build your own report. And it's a very simple report. It's not as fancy as any of these, but it was the idea there is for it to be a tutorial. All right, so next up, now we've got basically how you share in Power BI out of the way. Let's go to our step number one: administration and enablement. How do we turn this thing on? Well, first off, you have to be a Power BI admin to do this. So you have to be able to get in to the tenant administration section in Power BI. So you access the admin portal. You'll see a little screenshot of this on the right-hand side of the slide. It will be turned off by default. Up until this year, it was on by default, but that changed. So it basically will have been turned off for you as well if you had it previously on. So you may need to go and re-enable that. So you need to turn it on generally. And when you do turn it on, you can grant access to your entire organization, or you can grant access to specific security groups. You can see that at the bottom of the highlighted section on the right there. In fact, you can turn it on for everyone except certain groups if you select that checkbox right there at the very bottom. If you had them on and you had some reports that need to be used, but you don't want to generally make it available, you can turn it off with the only allow existing, or sorry, turn it on with the only allow existing codes option. With that, if you have it on and you only allow existing codes, users won't be able to create new anonymous reports. You might want to do that and then just briefly turn it off, publish a report, and then turn that option back on, and that gives you another measure of control over your anonymous access, your reports that are published out to the world. How do I know what reports have already been published out to the world? There's a section in the admin portal. It's not under tenant settings, it's under the embed codes settings, and that's what embed codes mean. It means published to web. And you can see here, this is from my MVP tenant. I don't have many published from that particular tenant, but those are the ones I currently have published. So if you want to know what's out there, these are the ones that's out there. So if you need to go and talk to somebody about turning that off or what's this all about, that's where you're going to go and get your general list. And it's really that simple to turn it on in the tenant. Okay. So next up, using published web. This is the section that didn't get published out to the agenda slide. And by the way, yes, I did take this picture too earlier this year. That's a tiger shark. That's our dive master petting it. And yeah, using publish to web it's a little bit like that. You kind of have a tiger by the tail in that sense. But anyway, it's actually fairly simple to use. When you open a report, this is using the new user interface. If you haven't switched to the new user interface, you might want to do that. You're going to have to do that shortly. So, but using the new interface, you have a menu bar along the top, and you've got a little ellipsis. You're going to click on that, and you're going to go down to the embed section. And when you're in the embed section, you're going to go over here and pick publish to web. That's how we enable the report for publish to web. You'll then be presented with a dialog box, and it is warning. It's basically warning you that this will be a publicly available website. You are in fact not allowed to publish internally. That's a licensing restriction. You're not supposed to use this feature to publish things internally, contrary to much advice that is out there. But it's warning you that that will be available outside the organization. You then click on the create embed code, and you get another dialog box that is warning anyone on the internet will be able to access this report and the data it contains. And if they choose to do so, Microsoft could highlight that in the gallery that I was talking about before. Don't publish it if you're not okay with this. If you're okay with all of these things, go ahead and do so, and then you get success. At this point in time, you're given a URL or some embed code, and you can do with that what you will. Here's an example of an embedded report on a web page. This is my blog. As I've already established, I'm an avid diver and I like sharks. I have a link on my blog, which is otherwise pretty technical, to the Worldwide Shark Attack file report that I put together a long time ago. This report does need a facelift, I must admit. I have to get in there and do that. But it's available and it's refreshed nightly. So you have an up-to-date set of you have basically an up-to-date report on what's going on with shark attacks through the world. But that's a Power BI report that's embedded in a publicly available web page using the publish to web feature. So that's what it looks like embedded. Here's just an anonymous report using the URL. It's not embedded in an outside page. Sorry, it's not embedded within a page. You can just use that URL and hand it to people. And I use this for Twitter monitoring, and I'm actually doing that for this event. If you go to link.tygraph.com/M365VM, you'll see the Twitter report for the virtual marathon as it sits as of well, about half an hour ago. We'll talk about why that, or about an hour ago. We'll talk about why that is here. But it's pretty fully functional with a few differences. All right. So let's have a little demo. Let's go through some of these steps. We will start with here. I have some content. And I'm going to go into the master report for our tyGraph for Twitter product. But it's running in my personal tenant right now. So here we have, this is actually the virtual marathon Twitter report. This is within Power BI. You can see this up along the upper left-hand side. I've got a number of reports in here, including build last week. And this was actually, I should update just check on the refresh status of the data here. There we go. As of 6:14 p.m., there were about 2,000 tweets for the event so far. So you can see it's fairly up to date. Now, if I want to share this out, I'm gonna first embed in SharePoint. I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I'm going to embed it onto a web page, and then I'm going to use Publish to Web. So to start with, I'm going to come up to this ellipsis here. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to come down here to Embed, and I'm going to select SharePoint Online. All right, very straightforward. And I get a URL. It's simple. There's not a lot of warning that needs to happen. I'm staying internal. So if I was to come over here to my SharePoint site, here's a brand new SharePoint page. I'm just going to edit this page. And I'm going to open up the web parts and type in Power. I should see Power BI come up fairly quickly. I do. I'm then going to add a report, paste the link here. And it should just take a second. There we go. It comes up with the main page. I can select multiple pages. This report has multiple pages, but I want to pick the main page. And I can decide whether or not to show the navigation pane there on the bottom. I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to go ahead and publish my SharePoint page. So now you should see right within the context of my SharePoint page, there's my report, but it's not static. So if I wanted to see, for example, this user's impact on the report, I can select it. Or I can click out, or I could just see these tweets, and everything, of course, on the page gets cross filtered accordingly. I've picked on originals, not retweets, so there we go. So if I pick retweets, you see what's going on. So everything is basically, the report is live and it's in place. This is the Power BI rendition of the report. We can see the pages along the bottom. This is not the anonymous rendition of the report. All right, that's using SharePoint. Now, what if I want to embed onto a web page? Or frankly, I could also use this approach to embed onto a SharePoint page using the script editor web part. I come down here to website or portal. This used to be called Secure Embed. And again, not a lot of warnings. It's giving me a code that I could use. I'm going to grab the iframe code here. And what I'm going to do is come up, I'm going to come to my blog. I'm going to create a new page on my blog. I'm going to go in here to posts, all posts. Not posts, sorry, pages. This will, of course, take a second to load up, which is tedious. There we go. I'm going to just create a new page. Come on, John. All right, and I'm just going to call it Tweets Demo. And I'll come into this block. I'm just going to hit paste. There, it figured out I'm punching in an iframe, so it flipped me into HTML view. I'm going to hit preview, make sure that works. That looks okay. I'm going to go ahead and publish this page now. WordPress isn't always the fastest. And there's the page address. So if I take that page and I paste it here, in fact, you could go to that URL, but you'll get a different experience. You go to the tweets-demo. You can see there's my blog comes up and that report is embedded within it. Great. But the only reason it's working is because I happen to be logged in to the same tenant in this browser. What if I'm not? If I'm not, I'm going to just come over here. Let's open up a new in private window. Let's paste that URL in here. You have to log in. So this is not a tool you could use for the extranet. This is only a tool you could use within the organization, but it's a good tool to be able to use within the organization. We didn't have this prior to about a year ago, which led to people overusing the publish to web feature for the use internally, and they shouldn't have been doing that. All right, now finally, let's come back here. And let's look at what publish to web actually looks like here. If I come to my ellipsis, I'm going to come down here to embed, and I'm going to publish to web. Now, it's not showing me the warnings I showed you before because I've already done this on this report. So it's just coming up with this these URLs. I'm going to come down here again and get the iframe. I'm going to hit close. And I'm going to again come over here and create another page. I just wish my WordPress was a tad faster, but we'll get there. All right, Twitter stats on is what I'm going to call this. And this time I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to just go ahead and publish it because I trust it's going to work. All right, I'm going to grab the URL here. Of course, it's going to work. Well, let's make sure, shall we? In my logged in session. There we go. You'll notice it looks a little bit differently. I'll highlight these here in just a minute. But in addition to that, if I come back here to my in private browser that I was using before, open up a new tab here and punch that URL in. You should see that it'll work for the world. So that's really, it's that simple to be able to publish this stuff anonymously. And you can see the differences in the three different mechanisms. Okay. Let's pop back to the deck. Go. So the thing to note is publish to web is not secure. Now, publish to web is the name of the feature. So I might be beating a dead horse here. I might be hitting you over the head with this, but you are taking your data and putting it available on the internet. There is a lot of temptation to do this though, because sharing in Power BI takes a license, and those licenses sometimes are expensive. So boy, it seems cheap to be able to just take your organization's data. I'm going to save the company some money. Yeah, but you might get fired doing it. That's what it boils down to. So all of these other mechanisms are possible, but they're expensive, and in some cases they can be difficult. So really, if there's only one thing you can take away from this talk today, remember, it's a good feature, but you should only use it if you use public data. All right? Let that one sink in for just a second. So I'm going to show you why now. So the URL that you get, let me come back to that, the URL that you get from the report. Let me come down here and come over here and go back to my main report up here, embed and publish to web. So here's the URL itself. And I could punch this in. I'm going to come over here and punch this into a page just on its own. You can see there's a whole lot of stuff. No one's ever going to remember that. So that leads a lot of people to believe they can get away with that because if you don't have the URL, you're not going to be able to get a hold of it, right? Well, that's not entirely accurate. I'll show you how. Oh, I should have left it up there. I'll just punch that in again. If you notice, the beginning of that URL starts with app.powerbi.com because it's running in the Power BI service. So if I was to come over here and do a search on app.powerbi.com, what am I going to see? Well, I'm going to see the Power BI main sign-in. I'm going to see some stuff. What is this stuff? I'm going to, well, what's this? Microsoft Power BI sign-in. Oh, look, it's a content is available. That's someone who's had anonymous turned on and has turned it off. They've discovered that maybe they shouldn't have done that. Let's go back. Here's some COVID data. Let's click on that one. Did I not click on it? There we go. So here's some COVID data that someone in Victoria has put, Victoria, Australia, it looks like, has put together. Probably publicly available data, probably completely innocuous in this particular case. So that's fine. That's a good use of this tool. But let's combine this with something. Let's combine it with something like, I don't know, profit. What's this? Customer segmentations, clients. So what's this information? We've got company names here. They're selected for various reports. I'm not sure who put this out there, but I'm not sure that this isn't demo data. This might be real. This is the problem. There's an awful lot of stuff out there that perhaps shouldn't be out there. And it's easily discoverable just by searching on some of the keys from the keywords from the report and app.powerbi.com. Here's Hitachi Consulting, legal services. This one's a demonstration, I would assume, but I hope so anyway. Yeah, revenue by country. As long as there's not customer information, it's not so scary. But there's an awful lot of information out there that's published this way that probably shouldn't be. And a number of us are on a mission to help this not be the case. And someone else who's on this particular mission is a guy named Dave Ruijter. And I'm just going to come down here, go down here, and go to Dave's Gallery of Public Reports. So what Dave has done is he has seeded a report with a number of search terms, and then he has used, I believe it's the Bing API, as a data source, and he's loaded that into a Power BI report and published that anonymously. So if you want to go to Dave's Gallery of Public Reports, you can search this yourself. You can see a lot of these search terms and how they come up with records. Let's come down here. Oh, look at this one, salary. That seems like a particularly salacious term. If we come here, there's a lot of reports around salary, and we could get into, let's have a look. Oh, here's some names of people. And here we have some salaries from a tournament. Again, this might be publicly available information. It might not be, but it seems particularly, it's a golf tournament. There's Phil Mickelson. There you go. Here's how much he got paid at a, I'm not sure which tournament. It was a BMW championship tourney. Again, we don't know what's out there, and you can see 6,000 reports, sorry, almost 6,100 reports are what Dave's report has found very recently. So I want to emphasize, don't publish this stuff if it's not public data. All right. Just for posterity's sake, and again, I will, come on, all right, let's go back. There we go. I will point out the bottom of the screen should have the QR code for you. Dave's Gallery of Public Reports is where you can go and see that stuff. I want to give full credit to Dave Ruijter. I think that's a particularly brilliant report. Let's talk about some of the differences between the published version of these reports and the anonymous version. To start with, when you're working with anonymous reports, the filter pane will not be available. So if you want to allow your end users to work with filters, you would typically do that using either the filter pane or a slicer on the report page itself. If you're going to publish anonymously, the slicers are the only option available to you. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got slicers along the left, and the filters are here on the right. The filters don't appear at all in the anonymous version of exactly the same report. This was our Twitter report for the Build conference that was last week. Reports can have multiple pages. So on the report on the left, again, this is the full Power BI experience report. Pages are listed down the left-hand side of the screen, and it's fairly obvious that this has multiple pages and what their names are. In the case of an anonymous report here on the right, all you get is this little 1 of 8 indicator at the bottom of the screen. You can page through it using the arrow keys, or you can select the 1 of 8 and it will pull up all of the names of the pages, and you can navigate to them that way. It's just different. It's not necessarily worse, although it's a little less discoverable in my opinion. There are a number of other limitations of using anonymous reports. I'll go through them. I'll have to explain the concepts a little bit as we go as well. So direct query is a technology available in Power BI that lets you go straight to a data source. So typically with Power BI, you import a set of data into a data set. It's cached data in the report. You build a model on top of that, and you can report off of that. When you use direct query, you don't cache the data. All you do is cache the queries that the report visuals need. So every time that the report is accessed or a visual is rendered, it goes back to the data source. This allows very low latency, but it does put some load on the back-end system. In any event, if you're using direct query in any way, you can't use it with anonymous. Anonymous will you cannot publish a report anonymously if you've got a direct query in your report. A composite model is a way to combine these imported queries with direct queries within the same model. And so because the direct query is not supported, neither are composite models at all. So you can't use the composite model feature with anonymous access. Neither can you use aggregations. This is a fairly advanced feature that is used to leave granular data at the source, but have aggregated data within the data model. Again, direct query won't be supported. Automatic page refresh. We'll get to that here in a second, but that's not supported by direct query. And filter parameters are not supported. Filter parameters are a way to pass in the value of a filter to the Power BI report from the URL. So you get a URL to a report, you can add ampersand, filter name equals filter value to the URL within the Power BI service, and it will load that report already filtered to that value. We already saw that the filter pane isn't there, and neither are filter parameters, so you can't use them with anonymous reports. Unfortunately, I wish you could. And finally, direct connect is supported in a limited fashion. I'll explain direct connect here. If I publish a Power BI report that has a data set in it to the Power BI service, I can then create a new report, and instead of loading data into that report, I can connect it to that same data set back in the service. That's called direct connect. I can do that to reports or to data sets in any workspace in my tenant. If I'm using an anonymous report, I can use direct connect and connect to an externally published data set, but I have to be within the same workspace. So know that if you're working with anonymous and direct connected reports, they all have to be within the same workspace. Okay, now we need to understand a little bit about data latency. And I think I defined it before. Data latency is the difference in time between which data is updated at source and when it's brought into the service. This is a typical Power BI report. A user will go into the Power BI interface or using the SharePoint embedding capabilities, access a report. That report is in there, and you can see that report is kind of bundled together with the data model and the queries. It's sitting there in the service, and it's refreshed on a periodic basis, either directly from cloud-based data sources or through a gateway for on-premises based data sources. It happens periodically. It's scheduled. In the shared service, you can schedule up to 8 times per day. If you're using dedicated capacities, you can do this up to 48 times per day, which means if you want to have an evenly distributed flow across a 24-hour time period, you can schedule in the shared service every 3 hours. So in that case, if in this situation, the data in the report that the user is seeing will be 3 hours or potentially 3 hours older than the data is at source. Okay. Now with an anonymous report, it's a little bit different. It's an anonymous report. Remember, they're all coming from app.powerbi.com. They're coming from a slightly different place. So you're not going into the portal. What's happening is a user will come into the anonymous report, and when that request is made, a cache of the actual report is put out into a web endpoint. And that's the report that the user will work with. and the lifetime of that report is 1 hour. So that data doesn't matter where, what data gets changed along the way. That data will always sit there for up to an hour until it times out. When it times out, that process is repeated. So if the data in the report that's sitting in the service has been updated, then the report will be refreshed with that. I hope that's easy enough to understand. This means our latency. This means our latency for the anonymous reports are 2 to 3 steps away from the data source. If we're pulling our data, say, from a data warehouse, that data itself is out of step with the data in the actual source system. That's why it's 2 to 3. But we have to refresh the data in the model, and then we have to refresh the report in the service, okay? We can refresh the data set, as I mentioned before, 3 times a day for the shared service, 48 times a day for the dedicated service. But we'd have no control whatsoever around the report refresh for the anonymous report. It will be an hour, and it will be an hour from the initial access or the last access of that report if it hadn't been accessed in the meantime. And that report won't get refreshed automatically until someone hits it again. So that cycle, so if it's out of date, if it's 3 hours have gone past, the next user will hit it, it will refresh then, and that hour will start counting down then. What does this mean? It means in the shared service, our anonymously published reports, again, if you're spreading out the refreshes evenly throughout the day, will be up to 3.5 hours out of date. Sorry, in the shared capacity, it will be potentially 4 hours out of date at maximum. I don't know why it says 1 hour there. It's completely wrong. It's 4 hours is what that should be. If you're in dedicated capacity, because you can set up those back-end refreshes every half an hour, the maximum latency you could have for that refresh would be 1.5 hours. Okay. Hopefully that's not clear as mud. One final thing to note about using anonymous reports is that there is no audit log. Anonymous access of your report is not tracked in any way. Regular access of reports are tracked through the compliance center. That's the screenshot you see here on the screen, with sensitive information blacked out because this is our actual data. And you can see every view of your Power BI report, but you cannot see every view of your anonymous report. Okay. So that takes us to the wrap-up session. I'm pretty much at time. That's I guess I timed that okay. First time I've given this presentation, so hopefully that was fairly smooth. In closing, if I haven't said this enough times, folks, only use this with public data. Again, that's very important. If you're going to use it effectively, and I've used it for years now with our Tag Graph for Twitter reports that we provide for events like this one. Understand the limitations. You have to understand where it falls down and what you can and what you can't control. You should understand data latency. Why is my data not up to date? Well, it wasn't refreshed and it was here. But if you meet the criteria, it can be a very powerful way to tell your data stories.
Hey, John, there is one question in there for you.
Oh, great. Excellent. Well, we're at the question time, so that's perfect.
Yeah, perfect. So just if you can see it, is there another way? You got it? Okay.
If there's another way to share anonymously using Azure App Registration, Service Principal configuration, and the Power BI app to generate an embed token. I didn't talk about developer topics here, and that's what we're talking about here. You can, yes, is the short answer to this question. If you are an ISV like we are, you can run, and to be able to do this, by the way, you have to have your own dedicated capacity. If you do, you're running Power BI in your capacity. Then you can basically use the technique you're outlining here to do the authentication for the report. When you do that, you can authenticate your users, but you're essentially handling that licensing. But that's not. So your question is actually anonymously. So there's no way to share anonymously that way. That would be authenticated that way. But you could, as a developer, choose to make that report available to everyone. It's running in your capacity. You're handling all of that authentication stuff in behind the scenes. So you could basically create an anonymously accessed web front end, embed the report in that, and use it that way. So I believe the answer to your question is yes, if I have the nuance down. We do that with our customers. Customers who don't have Power BI, they don't have Power BI license, they don't want to pay for that. So we'll provide. We have an online version of our product which is based on Power BI, and we handle the authenticate. The users still authenticate with their credentials from their own tenant, but we're basically absorbing the licensing cost.